classic language disorder is aphasia. Aphasia is an acquired language disorder, which means it's not innate. You don't have it when you're being born. You acquire it at some point in life. It happens to you, and then you all of a sudden have this language disorder. It can be related to speaking. For instance, some patients have trouble speaking, so they no longer find the right words. They cannot really express themselves anymore in language. But there are also patients, other patients who have trouble listening. So they may still be speaking, but understanding language comprehension is what they have difficulties with. In some cases, also both of those aspects of everyday communication are being impaired. So they might have troubles both speaking and listening. And this acquired language disorder, aphasia, is mostly linked historically to two doctors. One is Paul Broca, which was a French doctor living in Paris, and he got to meet a patient there in the hospital where he worked, who all of a sudden had a lot of trouble speaking. So this patient no longer managed to express his thoughts into fluent sentences. It was even worse. He could only express one syllable. That was the syllable tan. He would be saying this all the time in French, tan, 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 tan. That was the only syllable that he managed to produce. And then there were a couple of swear words that he also could still produce. But apart from that, he no longer had the capabilities of expressing himself in language. And this type of aphasia, where you're still understanding what people are telling you, but you no longer manage to speak in the right way yourself, is then called Broca's aphasia. But the opposite has also been found a couple of years later by a German doctor called Wernicke, who found the opposite. So here he found a patient who was still capable of speaking, but he no longer understood anything. So he also no longer understood himself when he was speaking. So it's the opposite, and that's often called Wernicke's aphasia. And now, of course, also both can be impaired, speaking and listening. Yeah, this is typically caused by a stroke, so by some brain damage. So you get a stroke, and afterwards, you're no longer all of a sudden capable of speaking or of listening, comprehending, or both. But this can gradually get better over time. So sort of those capabilities can sort of come back to you over time. There are also therapy, of course, can help. And this is very heterogeneous. So there are many patients are not the same. So they all might have had a stroke, but it might have led to different disorders that they might have. Some might be impaired in one linguistic skill, the others might be impaired in a different linguistic skill. So it's not really like there's one type of aphasia or one type of patient. So different parts of using language in everyday life may be damaged. For a while, they may be damaged for good, but in many cases also those skills can sort of come back. But also here, studies have been done using VR, as they call it, in this case, to sort of practice, to have people who had this stroke, who now have aphasia, to have them practice again their skills. And this can sort of take many forms. So some patients may all of a sudden have trouble in terms of their interactive communication skills. So this is not something you can practice in VR. Other patients may have trouble retrieving nouns from memory. So they want to express themselves in language, but they no longer can find the right nouns to produce. Others may have troubles with verbs, on the other hand. So you can sort of strengthen their skill to use verbs. Others yet may have trouble storytelling, so telling stories to other people. Of course, in everyday life, we're constantly telling each other stories. This might be impaired after this stroke, so this is also something you can start practicing again. Most studies looking at this aphasia therapy in VR have been carried out in this so-called EVA Park environment. One important thing here to say first is that this is not completely immersive VR using a headset, but it's using what they have sometimes called 2D VR or desktop VR. So what you see here in 2D is also what people see on a desktop computer, on a screen in 2D. So in a sense, you could say this is actually, if you're being very strict, you could say this is maybe not virtual reality. Because very important properties of virtual reality, such that you're really immersed, such that you're really surrounded by virtual environment, are not present here. But in this case, this makes sense, right? Because all those patients have had a stroke, they have had some brain damage, so you probably don't want to put some helmet, some goggles, some headset on their head. Takeaway points from those studies who have been looking at it, who have been testing this, is that this works really well in terms of user experience. So the users, the patients who are using this, the clients, are typically very happy about it. So they really like this because they can practice their skills whenever they like in this sort of simulated environment. The other takeaway point here is that this is still very much in its infancy. So much more research is needed. For instance, comparing those test groups to control groups to see how it works in relation to more traditional types of therapy. So much more work is needed there. But yeah, I'm just showing you this here as another example of an application in the field of language and communication of VR, in this case, 2D VR, desktop VR, where you can practice your language skills. In this case, if you've had this stroke, if you have acquired this aphasia throughout your life.